This is the VandySports podcast on the 440 Sports Network, and I'm your host, Billy Derrick. This week's Vanderbilt football pregame show is brought to you by the Wash House, the Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, Sutherland and Belk, and the Maynard Nexen Government Contracts Group. Topics on today's show, as well as this season's baseball content, are presented by the Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, a family-owned third-generation milk and ice cream distribution company located out in Murfreesboro. A partnership began over 50 years ago with Purity Dairy in Nashville to provide purity milk and ice cream to consumers in Middle Tennessee, and they now serve Southern Kentucky, Northern Alabama, Chattanooga, and North Georgia. Today, they supply grocery stores, convenience stores, and others with Purity products, as well as Mayfield, Nestle, and Haagen-Dazs ice cream. For more information and to pick up your ice cream today, visit their website at mpmci.com. Again, that's mpmci.com. Tell them Chris Lee sent you and get the Moose Tracks. All right, on today's show, we will preview Vanderbilt and Kentucky, 11 a.m. kickoff here in Nashville at First Bank Stadium. You can watch it on the SEC Network. Vanderbilt got to get up off the mat after last week's tough loss out in Las Vegas. 40-37 was the final as the Rebels hit a game-winning field goal with about 9 seconds left to beat the Commodores. So at 2-2, Vanderbilt staring at SEC play, and you got the Kentucky Wildcats coming into town and a familiar face in running back Ray Davis. I'm sure we'll be talking about that. We will also be talking to Joey Dwyer in our first segment, our classic traditional What to Watch For segment with Joey Dwyer. He's got a great piece up on VandySports.com outlining his 5 things to watch heading into this matchup. Ray Davis is one of them. Vanderbilt's response after last week is one of them, and I'll let you find out the others in that interview with Joey. Also, sideline reporter Kevin Ingram for the Vanderbilt Sports Radio Network, along with Andrew Allegretta and Norman Jordan. Our rotation continues. We had Andrew last week previewing UNLV. We've got Kevin this week. He was on the sidelines out in Vegas. I asked him about potentially, some of the injuries that happened last week, how some of those guys stand, but more importantly, just how this Vanderbilt team has responded this week. He talked to London Humphreys and some of the other guys, and he feels like they're confident heading into this matchup that they'll be able to respond. Also, to close it out, Jeff Drummond, managing editor over at Cats Illustrated, Kentucky's rivals site. We'll preview this matchup from the Kentucky perspective, learn about this offense under Liam Cohen, who has returned this time with a different quarterback, Devin Leary, for the Wildcats, and also the storyline of Ray Davis coming back to Nashville to face his former team, and get a sense of this Kentucky defense and how much they've improved after last season. But first, today's news. It's brought to you by the Wash House, which is also our presenting sponsor for basketball season. Are you dreading laundry day? Is it stealing time to do the things that you truly enjoy? Well, let the laundry professionals at the Wash House take care of that for you. With 2 convenient locations in the greater Nashville area, just drop off your dirty laundry and their professional attendants can give you back the one thing you can never have enough of, your time. Within 24 hours, you can pick up your nicely folded, fresh and clean laundry ready to be put away. Log on to washhouseclean.com. Again, that's washhouseclean.com, or stop in today and get your time back. All right, Kentucky at Vanderbilt on Saturday, 11 a.m. kickoff. The Commodores and Wildcats are meeting for the 96th time since 1896. Kentucky leads the all-time series. It's tight, but they do lead it 48-43 with 4 ties in there actually as well. So this is one of the tighter series between any SEC team and Vanderbilt. Of course, last season the Commodores went to Lexington and beat Kentucky 24-21 to end Vanderbilt's 26-game SEC losing streak. But the last time Vanderbilt beat Kentucky at home, you might ask, 2015. It was a 21-17 win under Derek Mason. So Vanderbilt trying to do something they haven't done in a while. Beat Kentucky at home. Of course, they're coming off a brutal 40-37 loss at UNLV. We'll see how this team responds. But for Kentucky, the Cats, they are 3-0. They've played a soft schedule, though, up to this point. They beat 44-14 over Ball State. They beat Eastern Kentucky 28-17. That was closer than a lot of the experts thought. And then last week they beat Akron 35-3, not 35-30. But the Cats are averaging 36 points per game this season, 407 total yards per game, just 214 passing yards per game, but 122 rushing yards per game. So balanced offense. I think they'd like to throw for more yards up to this point. I think Vanderbilt is an opportunity for them to do that. Players to watch, start with quarterback Devin Leary. 855 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions so far this season. Also, running back Ray Davis. We know all about Ray Davis, former Vanderbilt running back. So far this season, 240 yards, 3 touchdowns, 7 yards per carry. He also has a couple of receiving touchdowns, so we know how good he is out of the backfield as well. It'll be interesting to see kind of the fire of that Vanderbilt defense facing a familiar face. They got 2 other really good running backs as well, Demi Sumo Kangbe and Juton McClain. Couple of all-name guys right there. Sumo Kangbe and Juton McClain will also get some carries back there as well. Wide receiver Tavion Robinson has 14 catches for 260 yards and 3 touchdowns. Keep an eye on Barryon Brown and Dane Key as well. I think this receiver room is one of the better receiving rooms in the SEC, so Vanderbilt has got to key in on those guys. Defensively, a couple of guys to watch. Linebacker Trevin Wallace, 24 tackles, 4 sacks, and those 4 sacks leads the SEC so far, so he's been active. Defensive back Maxwell Harrison has 19 tackles, 1 interception, and 1 forced fumble. The weather forecast on Saturday is great. Sunny skies with a high around 85, so it'll be a hot one. It feels like this might be the last Saturday in the 80s, potentially. Of course, Vanderbilt welcomes Missouri to town next week, but we'll see about that. And they'll have good weather for a lot of alums coming back. Vanderbilt is celebrating the 15th anniversary of the 2008 Music City Bowl champions, the first bowl win in Vanderbilt's history. So I think that, of course, is historical. And Bobby Johnson, you would imagine, will be back on campus. Clark's old coach, as well as Earl Bennett. So many other guys, Javon Hay as well, that are on this staff. So it'll be good to see Coach Johnson. Lastly here, injury report. Christian James is out. Of course, still he's been out. He hasn't played this season. Junior Ezebo is doubtful. Doesn't look like he's going to go. But the bigger question is Grayson Morgan. I mean, I would expect Morgan to get out there and play, but he is questionable. Dericky Wright and Jalen Mahoney are both questionable. Talked to Kevin Ingram. He said, I would expect Dericky to play. He's been a Warrior, so he's been able to suit up and play. Also, Savion Riley, a guy that was not able to go against UNLV, and you felt his impact, his lack of presence out there. CJ Taylor is probable. BJ Anderson is probable after missing last week due to an illness, and then Gunnar Hansen is also probable. So Vanderbilt's got to get healthy. I think that's the biggest thing heading into this game against Kentucky. Number 1, get healthy. And number 2, eliminate the sloppy play and the ball security issues. And number 3, just play your game, right? Play to your identity. And I think Vanderbilt will have an opportunity to compete. All right, lastly here, let's get to today's mailbag. And I carried over a lot of these, and I apologize on Wednesday morning. I put it up a little late, but Chris and Luke got to one of them, the first question, but I'll get to the rest here. Mailbag is sponsored by Sutherland and Belka, family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt or in an accident, give Taylor or Russell a call at 615-846-6200 to see what your rights are and if they can help. All right, let's get to the mailbag. And again, a lot of these are just carried over from the early Wednesday morning mailbag. So I apologize for getting that out too late. Chris and Luke not having an opportunity to answer these, but I'll do my best. Right now, we start with GoDoors 94. Was the staff overconfident in its approach to the first 4 games, thinking they could use these games as developmental, but still getting 3 to 4 wins? Do you agree? And if so, is the approach changing going forward? I think that's a really good question. To be honest, I don't think they were overconfident. I think with Clark Lee's approach, he goes into every game, philosophically saying we cannot treat Alabama A&M differently than Georgia. He understands where they are in this build, and I think that's what a lot of fans need to understand is that the margin for error is still very, very small. And for this team to get to a bowl game this season, at this point, you've got to pick off four SEC teams now, as opposed to just 3 if you were already at 3 wins. So I think their goal was to be at 3 wins at least, heading into this Kentucky matchup. So sitting at 2-2, Clark Lee has said he'll take it, but they're upset. I mean, naturally, you're at 2-2 heading into SEC play. Nobody wants to be 2-2 heading into SEC play after 4 non-conference games, right? As an SEC team, I think you should at least be 3-1. And so for Vanderbilt, I think they have changed some things. I said after the UNLV game, I think a loss like that warrants some changes, whether that's philosophically, whether that's the players you play, whether that's how you coach. Some changes I think have been made. And if they haven't yet, I think they will be made. But to your question, I don't think they thought they could use these as developmental. I really don't. I mean, I think maybe the Alabama A&M game in the fourth quarter, I mean, you get up big there, but I don't think that was their approach. So I don't think it'll change going forward. But I think within the players and their execution, you cannot, and this has been a problem with Vanderbilt for a long time. Luke White has said this: you cannot treat UNLV differently than South Carolina or Alabama A&M differently than Tennessee. You just can't. You're Vanderbilt, right? And you're early still in this build under Clark Lee. So I think if anything has to change, it's just kind of the players' mindsets, and that starts with the coaches. So maybe slightly, but again, I don't think that was their approach. But I think it's a good observation. From VU Matt 23, Duke. The Blue Devils brought in 9 transfers under Mike Elko this year. Should Vanderbilt use the portal more to fill holes on the team? Well, it's a good observation. I mean, naturally, of course, you lose Ray Davis, you lose Jadis Richard, you lose Elijah McAllister to another SEC team, you lose Mike Wright. Who else? I think you lost a recruit. That wasn't the portal though, but I just think for Vanderbilt, they're going to be strategic with how they use the portal. They can't get the same amount of kids into school as every other SEC team can. It's that simple. I mean, they know that. They're not going to try to do things that they don't think are possible at Vanderbilt, but Prince Colley's a good example. He's a guy that Clark was familiar with. He recruited to Notre Dame. He fit Vanderbilt's profile, and they snagged him. So I think they'll be doing a lot of that, but you got to be strategic, and you can't put all your chips in the transfer portal if you're Vanderbilt, right? You can't go, all right, we're putting our chips on the table in the portal, and we're going to pull a Deion Sanders or a Lane Kiffin, right? No, you're not going to do that. 9 transfers, I mean, that's not that many. I think Vanderbilt brought in something similar, a little bit less. I think it was 5 or 6 maybe, but I don't know. Maybe it's 9 next year. Maybe they slowly increase, but I don't think that'll ever be a very high priority for them. Now, if they're available, they'll take them, right? I mean, you're going to take good players when you can, but they like I said, if this was South Carolina or Georgia or any other SEC school, I'd be speaking differently, but they're not. And you got to do what you can do if you're Vanderbilt. Let's see here. Raiders 1967. Can any participant provide any elaboration on how a timeout is called by a player in the last minute of the game without permission of the coach? And of course, if you don't know, that had happened with under 30 seconds left against UNLV. UNLV had run the ball on 2nd and 10, I think. And right after that, Vanderbilt called a timeout. One of the players called a timeout. Clark Lee confirmed that after the game. Now, one of 2 things happened. Either a defensive coach, staffer, told a player to call a timeout, or the player just decided, I think I'm going to call a timeout here. Now, I don't know. Again, I'm sure they have gotten this under control this week in practice. But if a staffer did tell a player to call a timeout, that's a serious issue. I don't. You've got to have a little bit more control, defensively at that point. I think if you're Coach Lee, Clark Lee was visibly upset after he realized somebody called a timeout. I think I said, he's like, whoa, who called that timeout? So he was upset. I think it's inexplicable that a player had called a timeout there, and then all of a sudden you do get a timeout. So, okay, you call a timeout. Why? Who knows? But okay, you call a timeout. let's get into a formation that can defend, what UNLV might do here, right? UNLV is naturally going to take a shot, right? You just gave them an opportunity. You gave them, okay, UNLV said, we'll take it. If you're going to give us another chance here, we're going to take a deep shot. If one of your corners makes a mistake, and we're going to go win the game, right? So it was just UNLV adjusting to what Vanderbilt did to themselves. Credit to UNLV, but Vanderbilt, I thought, really beat themselves badly against UNLV, and I think it's an issue. I think it's a serious issue. I haven't seen that situation occur. Raiders 1967 asks Luke, "Have you seen a situation occur previously during many years on the sidelines?" I'm sure Luke has. Of course, you think back to Michigan with Juwan Howard. I think it was, called a timeout when they didn't have one. So you would venture to believe this will never happen on that Vanderbilt sideline, and it happened at the worst time. UNLV deep shot right past Martell Height down the near sideline, and they win it with 9 seconds left. So that was not why Vanderbilt lost the game, though. I think they ended up beating themselves as a whole. We had a comment there from Dorfan. Maybe get the players together before the possession, note the timeout situation, and explain we will not use our timeout unless they use theirs, and we can force a punt with decent time on the clock. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said, of course, after a game like that, and Clarkley said that. He said there's a lot of reaction to this game and a lot of knee-jerk reactions, but if you're Vanderbilt, there's nothing else you can do, right? It happened, and you've got to respond against Kentucky on Saturday. All right, that'll do it for this initial first segment. It's now time for our guest line, brought to you by John Leffen and the Maynard Nexen Government Contracts Group. Maynard Nexen advises government contractors on all aspects of their businesses with a proud focus on matching legal solutions to business needs. Give them a call. That's 256-551-0171. Again, that's 256-551-0171. We kick it off with Joey Dwyer, what to watch for heading into Kentucky, and then Kevin Ingram, sideline reporter for Vanderbilt Radio Network, and then to close it out, Jeff Drummond, the managing editor for Cats Illustrated, Kentucky's rival site. But first, what to watch for with Joey Dwyer. All right, Joey, Vanderbilt and Kentucky, 11 a.m. kickoff on Saturday at First Bank Stadium in Nashville. You can watch it on the SEC Network. Joey, has anything changed before we get into your 5 things to watch? Obviously, you've been through almost a week here after the UNLV game. In your mind, has anything changed in terms of your opinions of this team and how you evaluate this team, or are they still pretty comparable to the way you thought right after the UNLV, especially during our postgame show?
Yeah, not a whole lot has changed. I mean, it feels like the same story has been applicable with this team all year. It's somewhere in there, but Vanderbilt is far from unlocking that right now with the mistakes it makes, with some of the intensity it shows at times, the little things. I don't know if it's going to be fixed, but we've always known it's in there. If that ever becomes unlocked and Vanderbilt ever finds a way to win an SEC game with this team is yet to be seen, but I think there's some reason for some optimism, but I would be mistaken to be able to sell that to people right now with full confidence, other than just a talk you off the ledge situation.
Well, and all of a sudden, right after the brutal loss to UNLV, you sit at 2-2 in the SEC or overall, and you're heading into SEC play, right? You got the Kentucky Wildcats coming into Nashville for an early kick. We start with the return of Ray Davis. And I like the first sentence here on your things to watch. And again, if you guys haven't read this, check it out at VandySports.com, Joey Dwyer's weekly 5 things to watch. You said it's impossible to ignore the storylines involving Ray Davis. And I would agree. He's a guy that just last year was in the black and gold and running strong in Lexington, leading Vanderbilt to a victory alongside Mike Wright. So it's interesting how the transfer portal can act as an immediate impact tool. And I think that's what Kentucky wanted. They wanted what they saw in Lexington when Vanderbilt came and beat them. Why is this the most important storyline? I don't know if it is in your mind or if this is just randomized, but it does seem like the biggest talking point heading into this game.
Yeah, it certainly does seem like the biggest talking point, and it's not helped by the fact that Vanderbilt hasn't been able to run it super effectively thus far, and that Vanderbilt has struggled to stop the run game in one of its 4 games, but has mightily struggled in that game, which was his only Power 5 game. So Ray Davis could legitimately take over this game, and I think that's a really scary thing for Vanderbilt fans to see if Ray Davis is running all over this defense and talking trash and all that. I think Vanderbilt fans really were rubbed the wrong way by some of his comments this offseason, and there's a lot to unpack here. I mean, it's not maybe the most important storyline in terms of game outcome, but I think Vanderbilt fans are really looking for anything right now in terms of just things to follow other than us hearing and reciting the same story over and over again. It's really interesting to see an 1,000-yard rusher who really helped to put Vanderbilt over the edge against this team last year, now coming into Vanderbilt Stadium with this team.
It's strange.
It's really strange. And I think Clark Lee has tried his best to ignore it and push it off to the side, but it's really difficult to do that, especially considering the presence of the media and all that. Ray Davis even talked to the media this week at Kentucky. So there's a lot to unpack here, and his performance on Saturday will be really, really interesting, especially if it's a big performance and it exposes some of the flaws in Vanderbilt's tackling and just defense in general.
Ray Davis so far this season, 240 yards, 3 touchdowns, 7 yards per carry. And I know, again, they haven't played any SEC teams yet, but he also has 143 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns through the air. So we know what he can do, right? I mean, we saw it last year. I know, Joe, you weren't quite covering Vanderbilt yet, but I'm sure you saw even some of those games, right, with Ray Davis and his success, and we're aware of it. I mean, who wasn't? You could argue he was Vanderbilt's biggest piece last year, and now he's in the blue and white. So really, I'm with you, Joe. I'm looking forward to seeing what he looks like, how motivated he is, but also on the other side, how motivated this Vanderbilt defense is to go up against him and see what they've got for him. And I thought it was interesting. He was talking to the Kentucky media, and he said, when I was at Vanderbilt, I would always talk trash during practice to CJ Taylor and Dericky Wright. And, I would always end up saying, well, I guess we'll never find out in a real game, what we could do to each other. Well, now you get the opportunity, to really, talk trash during a game. And then I'm sure after the game, they're friends, but on the field, they are certainly not. So we're looking forward to that. Joey, let's move on to the Achilles heel for this Vanderbilt team. The turnovers and the mistakes, the sloppy play, ball security, bad snaps, interceptions and fumbles at crucial times. I mean, I said it earlier this week with Chris and Luke. It feels like a comedy of errors. You just one mistake happens and then it sort of snowballs from there. You said that's something to watch, and that's the biggest thing to watch, I think, on the Vanderbilt side. Obviously, Ray Davis with Kentucky, but they can't turn it over like that and win games, Joey. And you did a good job of highlighting that.
Yeah, Kentucky's not an unbeatable team or a team that would run Vanderbilt off the field if Vanderbilt plays a good game. However, if Vanderbilt turns it over the way it has, if Vanderbilt has made some of the careless errors it has, I don't expect them to stay in this game with Kentucky, and I don't know if anyone should. Kentucky is too good to make these mistakes against. It's too good to have lackluster play against, and it's too good to do the things that Vanderbilt has done throughout the year. It's going to make Vanderbilt pay for a lot of those things. I think in order to win this game, Vanderbilt has to establish a consistent passing attack without interceptions, and I think it's capable of that. We haven't seen it thus far, though. We've seen Vanderbilt put up 37 points against UNLV. We've seen them throw for however many yards against Wake Forest. Neither of those games were wins, though, and both of those games were games in which the offense was graded out poorly. So it feels like Vanderbilt's offense has it in there. But, I mean, Billy, we've said this all season long. The offense has it in there, but it's not quite there yet. I think the passing game has to be what leads Vanderbilt in this game and has to be able to help it keep pace with Kentucky throughout the day. And I'm confident that Vanderbilt can throw for a whole lot of yards. I think whether Vanderbilt is able to avoid the big mistake and is able to make the play in the crucial time is probably the biggest thing to watch. Kentucky's corners aren't awesome. That's probably one of their biggest question marks as a roster, kind of similar to Vandy. So Vanderbilt will get its yards, but when it matters most, can they avoid the mistake and can they make the big play? I'm not sure yet. It's offensive line. Can it avoid some procedural penalties? Can it avoid the bad snaps? I couldn't tell you. That's on them. Defensively, can it avoid giving up a play in a big time, which I guess for most of the season it's done well. It's kind of implemented some bend, don't break, but on Saturday it was kind of the opposite. I'm really interested to see kind of how this team responds to what happened on Saturday and if it's a wake-up call or if that makes this team a little bit tighter, or does this team quit halfway through if they're down 14-0? We'll see, and I think Vanderbilt will learn a lot about itself on Saturday.
On paper, this is a home game, Joey, but in reality, and I think we'll be able to easily tell when we get up to the press box, that there's going to be a lot of Kentucky fans. It's going to be mostly blue and white, as it usually is when another SEC team comes to town. It's really nothing new for Vanderbilt fans. But I think this game was going to be different. Say if Vanderbilt beat UNLV, you got some momentum heading into your first SEC home game of the season. Now, all of a sudden, I think there's some fans not going that might have been going otherwise. But on the Kentucky side of things, heading into Nashville, Saturday's game will be the most challenging environment Kentucky will play in this season. And Mark Stoops said that. So that came straight from Mark Stoops' mouth. I thought it was interesting. He said it needs to be talked about, so they're not surprised when they see it, when he's talking about all the construction, because there definitely will be the most challenging environment we play in this year. From that point, just aesthetically and getting dressed and logistically and all that, I thought that was interesting how, this isn't Neyland Stadium. This isn't Williams-Brice Stadium. This isn't Athens, Georgia, but you got a scoreboard hanging from a couple of what do you even call those?
Cranes?
I'm cranes. Yeah, I don't even. It's early. You got a scoreboard hanging from some cranes, Joey, and you got the visitors' locker room and a tent. So ironically, this could be the most challenging environment Kentucky plays in terms of Vanderbilt. I said it earlier, Joey. This could have been different in terms of Vanderbilt fans showing up. Now all of a sudden you lose to UNLV, and I think there's some fans that might have said, I'm not going to show up.
Yeah, I mean, it's Vanderbilt's fifth game, and it feels like there's already a little bit of apathy within the fan base. I wouldn't say it's that the fan base is checked out yet, but they're certainly starting to seem like some sect of the fan base is starting to kind of get there. And can you blame them at this point, Billy? It feels like this team is not heading for where it should be heading and where the goal was. So this fan base is going to need something to help it buy back in. A win against Kentucky would do that. But heading into Saturday, I wouldn't expect this to be a crowd that's largely filled with Vanderbilt fans. If it's filled, it's going to be with a lot of Kentucky fans and probably significantly more Kentucky fans than Vanderbilt fans. And the bigger question is whether Vanderbilt has really any showing on Sunday or on Saturday. I think that's probably where my head turns to. Is there apathy in this fan base, and how much of it? If so, I think we'll be able to figure that out a little bit on Saturday.
Last thing to watch for you, Joey, can Vanderbilt's offensive line hold up? And they gave A.J. Swann a little bit more time on Saturday against UNLV. Swann was 17 of 35 for 335 yards, only sacked twice. So I thought they were a little bit better. Run blocking still, is weak. I just don't think they have they've held up their end of the bargain. Can they be better? Who knows? I mean, is this who this offensive line is right now? Are they not a formidable unit that Vanderbilt can rely on? We'll see. I mean, I think through 4 games they're not. But your last thing to watch here, Joey, is can they hold up? And they're going to need to. It's SEC ball now, so you're going to have to buckle up and get ready for an SEC front seven.
Yeah, and that front seven has generally been a strength for Kentucky. It's this front seven that has had 10 sacks through 3 games, so Vanderbilt's going to have to buckle in and really help A.J. Swann out, and it hasn't done that a whole lot to this point. That's led to some of the mistakes that A.J. Swann has made, is just struggling to kind of help him with the run game and pass blocking, but at some point it falls on him, obviously. That run game has to get going at some point, though, and I'm not confident it can on Saturday. Wouldn't that be something if Ray Davis ran for, 150 yards or something, and Vanderbilt had less than that as a unit? I think that's a real possibility that could happen heading into this game. Vanderbilt's offensive line has to take control and make sure that doesn't happen, though. And I'm not sure that or Vanderbilt's defensive line will be a huge positive on Saturday. It's really difficult to put your faith in either of those units at this point with some of the lack of pressure that the defensive line's generated, as well as kind of how the offensive line has got pushed around or made mental mistakes at times. I think there's a lot to unpack here, but Vanderbilt's offensive line has to be better, and I think we both know that. Vanderbilt knows that. Whether it can actually execute that is a completely different story, especially against this front seven, which is probably far and away the best they've seen thus far.
I lied, Joey. I skipped your first thing to watch. How does Vanderbilt respond to what happened in Las Vegas? And I know you touched on it a little bit there. I like the questions that you asked here. Does Vanderbilt come out flat-footed and get pushed around? Will it continue to beat itself in the same ways it has all season, or will it come out and impress against its best opponent yet? And you're right about that. I mean, Kentucky is probably by far the best opponent yet. I mean, Wake Forest, I think, would rival that, but I still think Wake Forest is bottom half of the ACC, if I'm being honest. So Kentucky with Leary, Ray Davis, all those receivers, a couple of really good tight ends. This is going to be a really big challenge for Vanderbilt, and I think if they're not careful, this one could get out of hand. I think they know that. So obviously the margin for error is small. We saw the margin for error is small even against UNLV, Joey. So I mean, it doesn't really change for this team, no matter who they're playing. That's just where this program's at. But how do they respond, Joey? I mean, I obviously we can't answer it yet, but I think that's one of the bigger questions here culturally, right? Within this program, internally, how do they respond after a brutal loss? I said the most disappointing loss in the Clarkley era. I know ETSU was a bad one in year one, but just, you had some momentum with the program, and then you go down against a Mountain West team. It'll be interesting to see how this team responds, Joey.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting. I think you'd like to believe that Clarkley has the locker room and has his culture in place still. He has belief from his players and his staff. I think that'll be put to the test on Saturday, though. I do believe that Clarkley has that, but it's a little harder to believe that if Vanderbilt goes out and loses 40-7 and is down 21-0 at halftime and doesn't respond well to that coming out of the break. Just it feels like this is kind of a gut check for this team, and they've had the crossroads, they've had the wake-up call, whatever you want to call it, in previous weeks, but we're past that now. This team has still some things to play for, but do they believe that they can get there, and do they believe that they can fight against a team like Kentucky, who's better than two teams that they've lost to? We'll find out, Billy, and I think that tells you a lot about Clarkley and this program's stability, and if they're kind of taking in the message that he's putting down.
Big one on Saturday. Get your coffee. Saturday morning, we'll be there bright and early at First Bank Stadium for our last-minute thoughts. So we'll probably try to get that out around 9:30 at the latest. Try to get that uploaded and ready for you on YouTube, and we will be ready to go. Weather should be good, Joey. No rain, no delay. Knock on wood. I think you've got some behind you there, but Joey, appreciate it, man. I'll see you Saturday.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Now, happy to be joined by Kevin Ingram, Vanderbilt sideline reporter on the Vanderbilt Sports Radio Network. And Kevin, let's hop right into it. We got Vanderbilt and Kentucky on Saturday, 11 a.m. kickoff here in Nashville, SEC opener. Let's start with what you saw in Las Vegas. I know you personally. First off, congratulations on your induction into the Bowling Green High School Hall of Fame. Special honor for you, of course. That meant you got to Vegas a little late there.
I did.
On Saturday. So congratulations. But as you got to Vegas, what did you see in that one? Obviously, it was a brutal loss for Vanderbilt, and they'll have to refocus here against Kentucky. But just kind of tell me what you were able to see and find out during that one.
Yeah, Billy, thanks for the kind words. First of all, it was really a special thing back on Friday up in my hometown in Bowling Green. It was the whole thing was really neat. I flew out there on Saturday morning. I left Nashville about 6:30, and I got to the team hotel. It was probably about local time. It was about 9:00, and so ate some breakfast and took a little nap, and then we went to the stadium. I think for Vanderbilt in that game, obviously a major disappointment with the way it ended. Still had a chance to win in the second half despite all the things that went wrong. The first quarter started great, led 17-0, but then the middle two quarters were really, in a lot of ways, where the game got away. You can look at a few plays at the end, and Clarkley talked about that. But just too many mistakes in those middle 2 quarters. You think about 5 fumbles, you lose 3, and then you have an interception mixed in there, and just a lot of things that didn't go well. And UNLV was able to reel off 30 straight points, but it looked like when you got in the fourth quarter, Vanderbilt was going to be able to steady the ship a little bit, scored a couple touchdowns and a field goal or 2, and got back even at 30 and had a chance to go in front there inside the final minute, but it just didn't work out. And UNLV hit on a big play and kicked the field goal right there in the final seconds. So definitely a tough loss, and one that's it's a game you look at, and I know probably everybody circled that one and say, okay, that's a game you have a good chance to win, but you can't do anything about it now. You go headlong into SEC play for the next 8 games, and this team just has to figure out a way to learn from it and flush it, go forward, and try to win a football game this week.
Kevin, we've seen what this team is capable of, right? I mean, they beat Hawaii. They ended up beating Alabama A&M, having a great fourth quarter in that one. And to me, feels like when this team plays clean football, when they eliminate the sloppy mistakes, they can compete with anybody on the schedule, right? Maybe outside of potentially Georgia. But I mean, Kevin, would you agree there that if they can clean this thing up, they'll be looking up, and they'll give themselves a chance. But like Clark says, if they continue to play sloppy, they leave it to chance, right? So would you agree there?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that's a whole lot of it. You just haven't seen a very consistent or even performance for 4 quarters out of this team. We've seen some really good flashes of play. There's no question about it. I mean, the second half against Alabama A&M really played well and pulled away. First quarter against UNLV was good. Couple spots at Wake Forest. That game was certainly, I think everybody would agree, sloppier than this team and this program had in mind. But yeah, this team's shown you some good things, and they've shown improvement, and that the talent is better in a lot of areas. But you just want to see that consistency throughout an entire football game, and that's what it's going to take to win the SEC. You have to play you don't have to always play 100% your best, but you have to play really consistently well to have a chance to win against teams that are going to be tough every single week.
I thought AJ Swan played a little bit better. Played a little bit more concise and in a clean football game. And Kev, I don't know if you got to look at his injury there on the sideline. I think I heard it was an elbow contusion. He should be good to go against Kentucky. Tell me what you saw about his toughness, and you were right there on the sideline. Maybe you got to look at him and what he was looking like. I know they showed him on the sideline warming up and he wore that brace on his right elbow. Kind of tracked me through that situation and how he was able to find a way to take his team down the field twice and end up tying the game.
Yeah, I thought he showed a lot of toughness in that game, Billy, especially in that second half when he came back and played. I think going into the halftime, we wondered whether he would be back at all. The injury happened right before halftime. I was actually over on the other side of the field because we were getting ready to do our halftime interview. So I was down close to the tunnel when it happened, and I watched it all from a distance, and I was not there on the sideline during that part of it. But I was there right before the second half started, and you're watching him, and he's trying to throw a little bit, and it just doesn't look like he normally does. It didn't seem like the ball had the zip on it, and watching him trying to get loose. But then, they played one series with Ken Seals, and then they came back with AJ after that, and he looked fine. Like, he threw the ball great, and I thought he really made some plays and showed a lot of toughness, and talked to a couple of his teammates about that. Talked to Justin Ball after the game, and talked to London Humphreys a little bit about that this week. And I think the consensus was, everybody knew about his toughness, but that was on display in Las Vegas.
Kev, let's get into one more guy in the offense, London Humphreys, a guy that has had 2 straight games over 100 yards, and he's averaging something crazy. I don't know if you have the stat. I think it's around 30 yards a catch or something like that. I think they said that in the broadcast. What have you seen from him? I mean, the kid's a freshman, and he is out here, beating Division I cornerbacks on the outside. It feels like it's a deep ball every time he makes the catch. So, what have you seen there from London Humphreys?
Yeah, he's looked good so far. He had 3 catches for 102 and that 56-yard touchdown. Had another big catch that helped set up a score. I've been really impressed with him. I think these young receivers, the sky is the limit for guys like London Humphreys and Junior Sherrill. And I interviewed him for our pregame show this week, and he said he learned a lot from some of the older players like Will Shepard and a few of the others that have been around here a while. But you love London's speed. I feel like he makes some plays like a veteran receiver. A guy who's been around a lot more than just a few games in a freshman season. The thing I like about him is on a deep ball, I've noticed this a couple of times that a lot of times you're running stride for stride and you got a cornerback running there with you, trying to stay with you going down the field. You don't want to give away too soon that the ball's about to arrive. And he always does a good job of that. Like he'll turn his head just the right moment to catch the football. And boy, that throw from AJ to London in the first half for the touchdown, it was basically coming right at me. And when that ball was in the air, I was like, this is going to work out great. It was a beautiful throw. And I mean, it hit him right in stride and scored the touchdown. But yeah, London's been really good. And, local guy from CPA, and there are a few local guys on this team. And that part of it's been fun. And there's so many good players in this Nashville area and the city and surrounding counties that you have a chance to really get some talent in this area. And Vanderbilt's been able to get quite a few from right around here, including Christ Presbyterian, where London played. Of course, the Patterson brothers and London and some other players from around this area that have been really good. And the young guys are looking good so far for this Vanderbilt team.
Let's go defense now. Of course, there are a couple of guys that are banged up, more than just a couple. Actually, we'll be looking to see if Mahoney and Derrick Wright will be able to go on Saturday. And of course, you've seen some injuries kind of scattered on the front seven there. With it feels like they haven't had everybody available that they've really wanted to have available this season. Kevin, do you think there's still more in that group, especially in the front seven? I think we know what they've got at linebacker and then at safety, and I want to get to the corners here in a second. But those interior defensive linemen, and then we'll throw the edge guys in there as well. Do you think there's more in the tank there?
Oh, I do, and that's a position group that we felt like going into the season was going to be one that would be much improved and have certainly improved depth. Darren Agu being out for a couple weeks hurt, and he's been making his way back, but that's a guy who can really be an impact player. He's been back for the last couple games, and you like the veterans, a guy like Nate Clifton and Devin Lee, and there's some guys who've been around here quite a while. But yeah, I think we can see even more out of that defensive line group. I like that position group, and again, it feels like the depth has grown there. As far as injuries, your guess is as good as mine on what we might see. I think we can certainly almost 100% count on Derrick Wright being out there. He injured that ankle back early in the season. I think it was in that second game against Alabama A&M, and he's just toughed his way through it. And we were talking to Clark Lee about that the other night. And he said, well, just one of those things. It's not going to get better unless you just sit down and rest it for a few weeks, and we can't really afford to do that. And Ricky wants to play, so we're going to figure out a way for him to get out there. B.J. Anderson was out for that last game, and Savion Riley being out, has been certainly noticeable. He's such a good tackler, even though he's a second-year player, but this is first year playing. He didn't play last season,
right?
But yeah, you have some injuries and just guys banged up. Those are things that happen during the course of a football season. Jalen Mahoney is another tough dude that just going to make every effort to get out there. So I wouldn't be surprised to see, especially those veteran guys that we know what they're about, and they can play through stuff. So we'll see when Saturday gets here.
On the edges there, Kevin, you saw Martel Height, Trudell Berry get the start against UNLV. It looks like they will be going again on Saturday against Kentucky. I thought they showed flashes at times. You saw the interception there from Martel Height, the freshman getting a good look there, and then Trudell Berry starting to grow into his identity and the player he wants to be. Of course, you saw the tough play at the end there on Martel, and I'm sure that's a play that he'll learn from and go back to throughout his career and kind of point to that. What did you see overall from them? And because heading into SEC play, right, Vanderbilt's going to need those guys to step up.
For sure. And when you have young corners, you're going to see good, and you're going to see plays that you like to have back. Boy, the interception, the pick six by Martel Hyde early in the game, that was spectacular. I mean, he showed that amazing speed that he has. And I think he's just going to be a fantastic player. Trudell Berry, a sophomore on this team, he's been around a little bit more than maybe Martel has. But yeah, those cornerback spots, boy, they really put you to the test. Was so many passing offenses today, and you'll see it even more as we get deeper into SEC play. If people know you have young corners, they're going to try to see if they can make the plays and put them to the challenge. So I'm sure we'll see more of that. Yeah,
Norman was telling me last time I had him on, I think heading into the Wake game, he was like, it's just hard. It is hard to play corner at the SEC level. And you've seen Hawaii, Kevin. I mean, you saw their receivers. Wake Forest obviously has good receivers. I think we forget there's really talented players outside the SEC as well.
Yeah, no doubt. There sure are. That Wake Forest offense is so difficult to defend. Just the way they play, it's just a strange sort of style, and it feels like they make you pay for every mistake.
All right, Kev, let's get into Kentucky. Obviously, we're familiar with Ray Davis coming into Nashville, and obviously we know what he did last year against Kentucky. It's a new look Wildcat team with Devin
Yeah.
Leary at quarterback, and of course they've got three good receivers. Barryon Brown, a local kid from Procone, who Nashville knows well, of course. Defensively, they're stout. What do you like from this Kentucky team? But from Vanderbilt's perspective, where do you see Vandy maybe having some success on Saturday against them?
Yeah, I think this Kentucky team's played pretty well. Yeah, they haven't played the highest level of competition yet, so we'll see. They've gone 3-0 and they played home games, and in some ways, the game against Eastern Kentucky was their biggest challenge. And that one went a little deeper in the second half. Played a couple MAC teams otherwise. I've been really impressed over the years with the job that Mark Stoops has done with that program, and I always say that that's a good example of an administration staying with a head coach and getting the payoff on the other side. He struggled a little bit, and program struggled a little bit the first few years he was there. But then once he got it going, I mean, it's been a string of bowl games for them pretty much every year. You can pencil them in to play in a bowl game somewhere. It is a little bit different looking team, certainly at quarterback with Will Levis now playing here with the Titans, and Devin Leary now taking the snaps. Guy who was a really highly touted player at NC State and transferred in. But yeah, Ray Davis, I mean, he was a focal point of Vanderbilt's offense last year, and you can say the same for him at Kentucky this year. He's a tough runner. He's a tough guy. He can catch a pass. He can make people miss. He can run over people. And I think Vanderbilt's defense, you got a lot of guys who played against him in practice last year and know what he's about. So that won't be any secret. Their defense has been good. Again, we haven't seen them tested against a power conference team just yet, but they'll get plenty of that here in the coming weeks. But I just think overall as a program, Mark Stoops and that group have done a really good job. And I know Cone is back as the offensive coordinator. So that I know that was a big thing for them to have him back calling the play. So yeah, it'll be a big challenge on Saturday, and it's kind of weird to play Kentucky this early in the season. That's usually a November game when it's
I know,
raining and or snowing, and at about 32 degrees or something.
It doesn't
like
feel
that.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't feel right. The weather needs to take about a 40-degree turn for us to play Kentucky.
Yeah, it's always late in the season there. Kevin, I really appreciate it. Good luck on the call. Of course, you're back home, so no wild trip out to Vegas or Winston-Salem. So you'll be back in Nashville for that one. Again, 11 a.m. kickoff, Vanderbilt and Kentucky. Kevin, really appreciate it.
Hey, anytime, Billy. Appreciate the time.
To close out the Vandy Kentucky pregame show, I'm now happy to be joined by Jeff Drummond, longtime Kentucky insider. He's the managing editor for Cats Illustrated, Kentucky's rivals site. Jeff, thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Obviously, big matchup coming up on Saturday, the SEC opener for both teams, Kentucky and Vanderbilt. So far, let's start with the Cats. Obviously, they haven't really played Murderers Row. The only tough competition or game for them so far has been Eastern Kentucky. Of course, that was tighter than Mark Stoops probably would have liked to see, but they're 3-0 heading to Nashville into the construction site. So I know we'll get to that a little bit later. But Jeff, just so far, what have you seen from Kentucky that you've liked, and maybe some things that you think they got to clean up before this Vanderbilt matchup?
Well, you kind of hit the nail on the head. They haven't exactly played a gangbuster schedule so far. 3 games that everyone expected them to really take care of business and kind of have 3 blowouts. Now, you could argue, looking at the scores, that 2 of them look that way. They weren't really played that way. None of these games did Kentucky just come out and blow the doors off, no pun intended, against these so-called lesser opponents. They really had to kind of fight and struggle to methodically build that lead and stretch it out at the very end to have a couple of scores that look like they took care of business, maybe a little bit more so than how it actually played out. But it's been a season of just being really close in a lot of ways. There are a play here and a play there, a penalty here, a penalty there, an execution breakdown from really being outstanding. But they've shot themselves in the foot in every game, almost constantly on offense, or they'd be putting up a lot better numbers than they have.
Well, you look at Devin Leary's stat line so far, the transfer from NC State coming in playing under Liam Cohen, 855 yards, 8 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. And that's up there in terms of SEC passers. But, we're only through 3 weeks here. have you seen what you expected to see from him so far? I mean, obviously he's a different type of quarterback than Will Levis, but I think there are some similarities, and of course with Liam Cohen coming back, I think that has excited some Kentucky fans. So, what have you seen that you've liked so far from Devin Leary?
The best thing I can say about Devin Leary is he's constantly keeping his eyes down the field and looking for every receiver in the progression tree, and kind of the thing they like to say about him a lot is all eligibles are in it until the play is over with Devin Leary. That wasn't always the case with Will Levis, who did his share of great things here. Will Levis had a cannon of an arm, just a monster arm, and he can make some things happen with that a lot of other guys couldn't. But one of the knocks against him was he would lock on to a receiver. He'd have a little bit too much faith in that cannon and wouldn't go through the progressions, kind of like Devin Leary does. And I think for the way that Kentucky plays and the receivers and skilled players that he has available in the passing game this year, he's going to put up better numbers than Will Levis did, even though Will Levis wound up, being a fairly high NFL draft pick.
Let's go to the running back, Ray Davis, of course, who played at Vanderbilt last year. He was their guy, right? And in Lexington, when Vanderbilt beat Kentucky, ran all over the Cats, and Mark Stoops said, "Let's go." Mark Stoops said, "Let's go get him." So obviously, this is the storyline that everybody loves talking about, and I'm sure it's been tough for both teams to continue answering questions about Ray. I'm sure Ray's gotten sick of it, but he's looked really good this year. 3 touchdowns on the ground, 2 through the air. And he looks more explosive. I mean, he's got a better offensive line, of course, to run behind. For Ray Davis, have you got a chance to talk to him heading into this matchup? And for Kentucky, I mean, what kind of focus do you think they have put on Ray Davis within this offense?
Pretty big, even though a lot of people would argue we haven't seen nearly enough of him for how productive he's been. They're kind of gradually working it in. I believe that they saw the first 3 games as an opportunity to go work on some things and just see how much they could put on Leary and the passing game. And they kind of said, if things get bad, we can kind of lean on Ray, and we know what we've got there. And that's kind of how it played out, because they're not exactly using him as a workhorse right now. When you think of these Kentucky teams under Stoops, they usually have like a Benny Snell or a Chris Rodriguez or somebody that might come at you 30 times a game. Just pound. They haven't used Ray like that yet. They've getting him maybe 9 or 10 carries and then 4 or 5 touches, in the passing game, which is something that's really new here. We haven't seen the running backs at Kentucky catch a lot of passes. And he adds another dimension in that regard. But the fans, I think, are slowly starting to figure out that this kid's a lot better than they thought he was. And a lot of that comes from stereotyping the helmet and the uniform last year. Even though they came in and they saw with their own eyes, Ray Davis ran all over Kentucky, a good Kentucky defense, and won that game. They're still like, yeah, he played for Vanderbilt. I'm sure you face that all the time with your guys. And there's this skepticism of how good can he be? And Ray has spent all week telling us these guys have players, and you better realize that and come to play on Saturday, because they've got more guys. They've got some guys better than I was.
Yeah, Jeff, I want to go back to that game last year, and I was not able to be there. I'm sure you were there, and it was shocking to see that result. And Vanderbilt, of course, was reeling. They had a couple of SEC losses in a row, and their fans were upset. And all of a sudden, they pick off a win over a ranked Kentucky team. And we know Will Levis was banged up, and the offensive line was struggling. But from your perspective, how did that happen last year?
I think they had gotten so beat down at that point, kind of going through the SEC gauntlet. And that offensive line, it just wasn't good. And they just didn't have much chemistry. You had 4 of the 5 guys arguably playing out of position, not their best natural spot. You have Will Levis out there. I mean, God bless his heart, but he had a broken everything at the end of the season. He was holding it together with duct tape. And but he still wanted to go out there and try to help his team win when he probably should have shut it down. But between that and the offensive system that Kentucky was trying to run, obviously they made a change in the offseason from Rich Scangarello to bringing Liam Cohen back. I think that was a big part of it. And they did some of the things we mentioned earlier when we started talking about it. They committed 2 really bad penalties at the end of the game where if they don't hit the guy in the face mask or don't interfere, I think towards the end, they probably find a way to eke that out. And then
because that was on a 4th down. That I think that face mask. Yeah,
people forget. If you win that game 5-10 years from now, people say, "Oh, they won." Nobody remembers the details, but you lose, and everybody will remember those for a long time.
I want to get a little bit deeper into this offense. I know we'll get to the Kentucky defense here in a second, but the receivers, I look at those receivers, and I love what Kentucky's got there. Barryon Brown, a kid from Nashville who has been explosive. We probably still haven't seen his full capability in that offense yet this year. And even last year, I thought he could have been featured maybe a little bit more. Tavion Robinson this year so far has been the guy. He's got 3 touchdowns, also Dane Key. So do you think with Liam Cohen, this offense feels a little bit more explosive potentially than they were last year? Because, again, I look at those receivers, and that's a group that might scare me if I'm Vanderbilt.
We've seen more explosive plays in these first 3 games than maybe we saw all of last season from this offense. I mean, that was a horizontal passing attack last year. It was Will Levis turning and throwing the ball sideways and hoping a wide receiver could make a play, or getting way behind in some games and having to fling it down the field. But it just wasn't very cohesive. It never looked anything like it did the year prior with Liam Cohen, a pretty good offensive line, and a healthy Will Levis. The irony there is he only had one, when he was fully healthy and had a good offensive line, he only had one wide receiver that was very good, Wan'Dale Robinson.
Yeah.
So defenses could kind of lock onto him. You can't do that with this Kentucky offense right now. There's 3 guys that can hurt you in the wide receiver core, and there's also 2 or 3 playmakers in the tight end group that Cohen likes to use a lot more than his predecessor did. And they're throwing the ball to Ray Davis, and that's kind of a wild card there. Bit of a revelation that none of us really knew that he was such an effective pass catcher.
Let's go defensively now. Kentucky last year, you mentioned how good defensively they were. And I think a lot of Vanderbilt fans forget that the Commodores were able to beat a good Kentucky defense last year. And you look this year, linebacker Trevin Wallace already has 4 sacks, which is crazy. I know it's not the best competition, but that leads the conference. Maxwell Harrison is a guy that has popped. He's got an interception and a forced fumble so far as well. Is Kentucky as good defensively as they were last year?
Remains to be seen. They've got some star power over there. A guy you didn't mention, Deion Walker, is just a monster on the defensive line. I mean, we're talking about a guy 6'6", 6'7", about 350, 360 pounds. And they use him standing up in a 9 technique sometimes and rush him off the edge. He does things. I call him the grizzly bear because that's what it feels like when I'm trying to interview him. It's like, people shouldn't be this large.
This big.
It just doesn't happen. It's like a kind of a Marvel character or something like that. But he's disrupting things up front to the point where their other defensive linemen are getting a lot of chances to make some things happen. And a guy like Trevin Wallace that you mentioned is timing up some blitz as well and getting pressure. The only question we had going into this season was the secondary. And so far, it's held up really well, and they've done a pretty good job overall. You mentioned Harrison. He's got a chance to be really good over there. Very good in run support, not just defending passes. But he's a guy, when the ball comes to that edge, the ball carrier usually goes down. Really good tackler. The depth is a little bit questionable. If they have anybody go down at the corner spots, it's going to get tricky for Kentucky, and Brad White's going to have some challenges. But the 11 guys they can put out there are as good as probably what he's had maybe back to 2018 when they beat Penn State in the Citrus Bowl.
Interesting. Let's get deeper into this matchup. Obviously, these two teams have a tight history. I think a lot of people forget that this is a tight series. Kentucky leads it, I think, 48-43 with several ties in there. There's been some streaks from on both sides, right? I think Mark Stoops had a 6-game winning streak on Vanderbilt until last year. And Vanderbilt hasn't beaten Kentucky at home since 15. So Kentucky has had control of the series as of late. With this matchup, though, what do you look at specifically, right? I like to ask everybody we have on, for Kentucky to win, this has to happen. Or if Vanderbilt wins, this has to happen, right? So what are some of the things you look at within this matchup on Saturday?
Yeah, one of those you always kind of go to in these situations, take care of the football. That may come off as generic, but pretty big for Kentucky. Limit the penalties. Penalties have been a big pain. I mean, it wiped out a touchdown last week, a beautiful deep ball to a freshman who scored a touchdown. It's cost them some drives where they thought they would score more points this season. So those little operational details, I think, have to be big. And then on the defensive side of the ball, it sounds like they've got a ton of respect for Swan at quarterback. They've said nothing but great things about him all week. Over and over again. And they think that obviously Shepard can play a lot. Everybody knows about that kid. Really good, but a couple of guys that can hurt you deep too in that wide receiver core. And they expect to be tested down the field. So one of the big keys outside of those things that apply to every game, I would say, is getting some pressure on Swan and making him a little bit uncomfortable. Could be the biggest key for Kentucky.
It's funny, taking care of the football is the key for Vanderbilt as well. So that has certainly been a problem, as you probably know. It's interesting heading into this matchup. We know about the construction going on in Nashville. The capacity's down to about 28,500 right now. They got a scoreboard that's hanging from a couple of cranes. Kentucky's locker room is going to be inside of a tent. They'll have to walk across the road to get to the stadium. Mark Stoops said Saturday's game is going to be the most challenging environment Kentucky will play in all season, which I thought was interesting. For Kentucky, is that a distraction? I mean, I know it's the first SEC game of the season. This matchup is usually played later in the season with some snow or sleet or rain or freezing rain, whatever. But what do you put any importance on that and kind of the exterior atmosphere heading into this one?
I don't a whole lot, even though they've brought it up a few times. And it kind of feels like, Hoosiers, where he goes and measures the baseline and the free throw line, the height of the rim and all that stuff to kind of get it out of their minds that even though the things around the football field will look and feel a lot different, it'll be an odd kind of feeling. You're still out there on 100 yards and that's where the game's going to be won and lost, not with any kind of distraction from cranes and floating scoreboards. I saw one flying around in the breeze earlier this year. That was kind of good.
Yeah, that it's been a little hectic over there. Although I think they've done their best with it, and it's been all right. Lastly, here, Jeff, I want to get your take on Kentucky fans, right? We know they travel to Nashville very well, and it feels like the better they get, right, the better team they have, naturally, you support a winning product, Kentucky fans will travel. You expecting a lot of blue and white on Saturday in the Music City?
I do. I think a lot of them see it as a good opportunity to go and enjoy Nashville. It's one of their favorite places to visit for, not just Vanderbilt games, but the SEC tournament and even out of season, go down to see a show down there or whatever and just enjoy the music scene. A lot of people in Western Kentucky are really close, a lot closer to Nashville than they are to Lexington. So I do think that'll be the case, although some seem to be getting a little bit scared off by the construction situation. And this might be a year where they say, I don't know if it's really worth it.
Yeah, there's cranes everywhere you look. I mean, it can be a little bit of a mess, but I think that means that the future is hopefully bright at Vanderbilt for their program. But Jeff, really appreciate the time and looking forward to this matchup on Saturday.
Yeah, same here. I think it's an intriguing one, and it's unusual to be seeing these teams play, like you said, in September.
Yeah.
It's a weird feeling. This is supposed to be the end of the year, but we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I had Kevin Ingram, Vanderbilt sideline reporter for several years on, and he's used to battling the elements, the environmental elements of this, and he says it doesn't feel right that it's going to be 85 and sunny and no rain or freezing rain in this. So we'll see. But Jeff, thanks again.
All right, take care, Billy.
That'll do it for this week's Vanderbilt football pregame show. Once again, Vanderbilt and Kentucky, they tee it off 11 a.m. on the SEC Network at First Bank Stadium here in Nashville. Looking forward to it. Ray Davis returning home to Nashville, of course, the biggest storyline. But can Vanderbilt respond after last week's brutal, disappointing loss in Las Vegas, 40-37? To close out, this podcast has always been free, and we plan for it to always be free. So here's how you can keep it that way. Number one, give the podcast a review and a 5-star rating. That helps us get noticed. If you're listening and haven't subscribed to VandySports.com yet, please do. It's $99 a year and $9.99 per month. That helps us tremendously. Again, $9.99 per month or $99.99 per year. Subscribe to our VandySports YouTube channel. We've started to gain some traction there. We've got post-game press conferences, last-minute thoughts with Joey Dwyer and I. All of our podcasts go up there. Weekly pressers with Clark Lee. All kinds of content going up on our YouTube channel. Go subscribe to the VandySports YouTube channel. Finally, if you're interested in sponsoring the show, email Chris Lee at chrislee70@gmail.com. Again, it's chrislee70@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you again soon with more episodes of the VandySports Podcast.